Hi, hello. I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and it is currently 10:10 p.m., and I thought to myself at approximately 9:55 p.m., why not talk about everything that I read in March and April? Why not? What could possibly be wrong with that idea? What could possibly be the consequence of starting to film a video at this hour? I, for one, see no flaws in this plan, so here we are. This is a reading wrap-up. I do these without spoilers, which I acknowledge means something different to everybody, so because of that, what I mean is that I don't say anything in these videos that I would consider to be spoilers. My general rule of thumb is that if it would make me mad to learn something, it's not in here. That's my rule. It's what I got to work with, okay? Your mileage may vary. Fun fact, I'm actually working on a different video right now that I thought would be going up at about this time, but it's not done yet. And rather than making you guys wait even longer, and also because honestly, having a break is kind of nice, I am using this chance, this brief moment of clarity, to actually do a bi-monthly wrap-up on time for once, like within the first week of May. This is gonna go out into the world. I'm kind of popping off. Like, I read 4 books during this period that were over 500 pages. So in a sense, if you squint, the long winter of my eternal reading slump, I think is actually coming to a close. I know I've been wrong before, but I really do feel like this time, for real, we have finally left the old country of It's So Over and re-entered the wonderful world of We're So Back. I have been yearning for just absolute rectangles recently, for books that I could use to knock out an intruder if somebody were to break into my home. And in the stack to my right, we have 4 such books and many others to explore together today. But I'm just rambling at this point. Before we actually get into it, before we finally get started, I just have a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month. Book of the Month is a dear friend of the channel, the artisan behind the super cute and kind of overfilled rainbow shelf that has slowly accumulated over the time I've been subscribed. And if you've never had the pleasure of hearing about them before, Book of the Month is a subscription service that's designed to bring the best and the brightest in new releases to your doorstep every single month. You go into their website, you browse their monthly repertoire of new releases by debut authors, rising stars, old icons. It's a wide assortment. You pick your favorite, it's delivered to your door. Nothing particularly speaking to you, it's okay. You can skip, no questions asked. This month I have 2 books that I'm really excited about. First one being the new Fonda Lee release, The Last Contract of Isako. This is a standalone space opera that follows this old veteran swordswoman in space who ends up getting talked into taking one last job before she retires. I think that this is going to be awesome, and I'm super excited to actually have it in my hands. But the other book that we're rocking is The Burning Side, which is quite a bit different. This is a literary fiction family drama that has like startlingly good early reviews. On Goodreads right now, it's at like a 4.6, which is just outrageous for literary fiction. That's not something that you usually see. So I was intrigued, and this book follows a couple that is teetering on the brink of divorce when suddenly their house burns down, and then they have to deal with the consequences of that, which, as you might imagine, are probably numerous. So yeah, both of these I think sound pretty good, and if you're interested in reading either of them with me or in checking out any of the other books that Book of the Month has on offer, I strongly recommend heading on down and clicking the link in my description and using the code FLORAL to get not only your very first Book of the Month book for just $5, but also this cute tote that is perfectly shaped to hold your new Book of the Month book. Wow, isn't that wonderful? Thank you as always to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. Love you guys, but let's get back to it. Hello, welcome back from my ad. I'm glad that you guys all made it back in one piece. I hope that the other version of me, who once had access to all 10 of her nails, was not mean to you. I'm glad that she let you go. I'm glad that you weren't held in her dungeon for very long. Okay, anyways, the first book that I read, I actually read this back in February, but I forgot to include it when I made that arbitrary divide in the wrap-up that I posted in the middle of March. So I'm gonna talk about this book first, and I'm gonna hope that at the end of that you can still trust me, even though the title of this video technically was a lie, and a more accurate title would actually have been everything that I read in March and April, and also one book that I read back in February but forgot about. And it's silly to even have that problem because I liked this book. This is Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austen. The premise for this book is pretty slice of life. Like, it's very much that type of contemporary novel where you're just plunged into the thick of somebody's world and you get to see all of the things that they're kind of handling badly inside of their lives. And in this case, we are following this autistic lesbian named Enid, who is super obsessed with space. Like, she knows everything that there is to know about space. Her dad has recently passed away, and he left her mom when she was like just a kid to go and raise a second family that Enid was never really properly allowed to interact with. So in the wake of his death, Enid now has these 2 half-sisters and also, I guess, technically a stepmom, and she has to decide whether and how to continue getting to know these people, if she even wants to, while also balancing her mom, who is definitely like pretty emotionally emotionally unstable. She's also balancing this new budding relationship that she kind of has with this other woman, even though she's never had a relationship before. Like, she's very avoidantly attached. And also, all the while, she's starting to feel herself go a little bit insane as she becomes increasingly convinced that somebody is following her. And there's not really like a lot of other meat and substance that I can give you about the plot of this novel, because again, it's very like character and scene driven, where you're just following her as she goes throughout her days. And there is just enough intrigue from that stalker plot line where you're wondering like, ooh, what's gonna happen? Is she gonna get stabbed to death with a knife? Like, you are a little bit thinking that, and that does kind of keep you turning the pages, but mostly you're dealing with higher level emotional concerns. The prose in this book I would describe as pretty sparse. It's relatively simple. It's usually hyperliteral and a bit repetitive, especially for the first person perspective book. But I feel like the way that this book is written, if you're not annoyed by it, just gives you such a coherent idea of who the main character is, which for me, I was like, oh no. Ooh, that main character sure reminds me of somebody that I know. She's definitely, with love, a little bit weird. Like, she's got a lot of stuff going on that she's clearly not medicated for. She's very detached in both the way that she sees herself inside of the world, her sense of humor, her relationships. And you know what? Late night thoughts. Maybe I only worry that you would find her annoying because I feel like other people would find me annoying. Maybe it's all just based in my own lack of a real self-concept. The way that this book is structured is with these little vignettes that are scenes that are lasting, in some cases, less than a page, in some cases just one paragraph, but usually between 1 and 3 pages. And I think that for some people who prefer their character-driven novels to have a little bit more of a languid vibe in their pacing, you're gonna find this book to be kind of jumpy, to be kind of all over the place. Even though the content is quite literary, the style of the book is so contemporary, it's so fast-paced. I know I've said before on my channel that I think that we should normalize reading the first 3 pages of a book before we buy it, but it's especially true with a book like this. Like, you're gonna know pretty much immediately if you find the writing style to be compelling or annoying. I found it worked for me. I gave this 4 stars. I really liked Enid as a character. I thought that her journey was meaningful and resonant inside of this book, not just because I found parts of her story relatable, but also because I think, again, that she was a very coherent and deeply felt character that you don't see very often in the center of books like this. All of Enid's relationships, I think, were interesting, but I especially liked the relationship that she had with her mother, who is also somebody who is very much undiagnosed, mentally ill, struggling under the weight of everything that's happened to her. The way that this book explores the feelings that you feel when, as a child, you were also forced to kind of be a parent, and the complicated nature of that role reversal, I think, as you get older, really good, really well done. My biggest problem with this book was 100% just that it was too short. Like, you have all of these irons in the fire at the 80% mark, and then at the end, everything just kind of happens instantly all at once. And also, it's pretty saccharine tonally in a way that felt a little bit disconnected from the realism in the emotions of the rest of the book. I don't know. I feel like the ending was just only okay, but the book as a whole, I did think was good. I thought it was super worth reading, especially if you like or are interested by the concept of character-driven, really fast-paced contemporary fiction, because those are 2 things you don't usually see inside of the same book, or at least 2 things that I don't usually see inside of the contemporary fiction that I read that tends to be a little bit more plot-driven. But yeah, that's interesting facts about space. Okay, next up, after that, beginning of March, I read this handy-dandy special edition of Blood of Hercules, and even though I only gave this book a paltry 1.5 stars, even though this book took from me many, many things, I am not going to be going into any more detail than that in this video, because to do so would mean spoiling something that awaits you inside of your imminent future. So yeah, this is a gift. If you've never heard of this book before, I would recommend staying that way. I would recommend continuing to know nothing about it. I think that your journey will be more enjoyable when the time comes. Yeah, this is only in my wrap up for the sake of posterity, because I don't know, I guess I could not talk about it, but that would feel kind of weird. I don't do that on this channel. I like making sure everything I read is in my wrap up videos in case anyone's ever curious. You know, what if you're going through the backlog and you're like, OMG, when did she read Blood of Hercules? Probably not many people will wonder that, but one person might, and I would be that person if this was someone else's channel. So I feel like that's enough of a reason to just include this anyways, even though I'm not really talking about it. But yeah, it was pretty fucking bad. I will say that. Next actual book that I read and that we're gonna talk about as we do in wrap up videos, we have Margo's Got Money Troubles. Margo in this book, this might shock you, but Margo is having financial difficulties. Margo's got money troubles. More like Margo's got penny problems. More like Margo's got dollar dilemmas. Me went on Margo, and also I'm experiencing a coin conundrum. Oh, it's this book. Oh, what am I saying, dude? It's so over. We've re-entered the borders of it's so over. No! Who up late at night making word salad? It's me. It's me. I'm the word salad chef. But beyond just Margot's currency quandary, what is this book actually about? Let me tell you. So this book follows a girl named Margot who gets knocked up her freshman year of college by her English professor in a remarkably predatory English professor ex-freshman student relationship. And as a combination, I have complicated feelings about abortions, plus, hey, fuck you, English professor, for trying to control my life and my decisions. Margot ends up deciding to keep the baby to the chagrin of the father of this child, who, as you might expect from such a class act, immediately abandons ship and makes Margot care for this kid on her own. And because Margot is like, I don't know, 19 years old and like doesn't have a great support system, when her English professor's super rich mom comes and tries to make Margot sign an NDA to keep her quiet in exchange for a paltry amount of money plus a trust fund for her kid, Margot signs it. She like lets that be the only child support that she receives from her English professor, and then it's just she's left on her own and she drops out of college and she has to find a way to take care of this newborn baby. In order to do that, she ends up turning to OnlyFans. This takes place like, I don't know, 10 years ago, during the early days of OnlyFans, whenever that was. And as Margot is dealing with the early days of trying to keep a human child alive, her dad also reappears inside of her life. And her dad is this former WWE superstar who was never really there when she was a kid, has since retired, has been in and out of rehab because he suffers from opiate addiction, as I'm sure a lot of the people in WWE probably do, considering how often you get like horrific injuries in that sport. But anyways, he reappears inside of Margot's life and really steps up in a way that Margot's mom, who is normally there and who actually raised Margot, does not. So they're starting to reconnect. He's helping her take care of her kid while Margot is also doing OnlyFans in the background. And the book does a really cool thing where you're kind of comparing something like a WWE to something like an OnlyFans, because in a way they're both performance art, right? In both cases, it's people using their bodies to create entertainment content that is not entirely real, that is only a facsimile of authentic emotions and authentic human relationships, where everybody who is participating, creating, consuming this content is kind of in on it. They're kind of in on this idea that, oh yes, we are suspending our disbelief and we are accepting this thing to be what it claims to be rather than what it actually is. Like, we're agreeing to do that. The stuff this book has to say about what art actually is and what it means to have an audience and how to entertain people. Super well done, I think. I read this book with an in-person book club that I joined thanks to one of my friends, and I was surprised by how much I actually ended up liking it. Overall, the writing is pretty easy. This book is fast-paced, it's super readable, but it also is doing some like slightly more literary things in terms of how it does perspective, especially. Like, there are sections of this book in third person and sections of this book in first person for reasons associated with how Margot sees herself in these scenes that she's kind of recounting to the audience, which I think is a really cool narrative tool. Like, I tend to enjoy books that play with perspective quite a lot. And in this case especially, I don't think it's ever confusing. Like, you're never lost at any point. Pretty similar to Interesting Facts About Space. If I had a nickel, am I right? Like, the first two books in this video have the same problem. But my biggest issue with this book is that, again, lots of irons in the fire around 80% through, and then it's just like the book decides to end and everything works out. Like, I swear to God, some contemporary fiction authors are scared to death of adding an additional 30 pages at the end of their book so that way they can actually have meaningful emotional conclusions. It's like the concept sometimes of being over 300 pages is horrifying. And to an extent, I get that fear because, I mean, you're writing a super fast-paced book. You don't want to suddenly bore your audience in the last act and then like they forget everything that they liked about it to that point and they're just kind of mad because the pace changed so tremendously. But I feel like there's got to be a way to do it with enough TLC that doesn't have that problem. I think the biggest victim in this book of its length and of its lack of an extended resolution is Margot's relationship with her mom, which I found super duper interesting the entire book. It generates a lot of conflict inside of the story, but then is kind of just like shrugged away in the last act. And I don't know, whenever that happens inside of a book, I just think it's kind of a shame. With that said, the sugary and kind of abrupt ending to this book was really my only problem with it. Everything else I liked way more than I thought that I would. And if you want a book that is genuinely pretty funny, an interesting meditation on creating art and on who art is for, and a quietly emotional and resonant portrait of what it's like to be a mom and what it's like to also, through being a mom, rebuild your relationship with your own parents, with your own dad, how exactly you go about building that village around you as a mom, how exactly you decide who deserves a place in it. If any of that sounds like it might be up your alley, I think that you might really like this. After that, I read Two Can Play by Ali Hazelwood, which is one of her novellas that she recently trad-pubbed, but it started off as, I think, like a Spotify exclusive audiobook. She's done a bunch of those recently. Speaking Speaking of her doing a bunch of those recently, did you guys know that Ali Hazelwood published 6 things last year? That's so many things. 6 things, dude. What are we doing? And granted, only 3 of those things were full-length books. But 3 of those things were full-length books. That's insane. The other 3 were novellas. I think that's just a lot for anyone, and I'm also using that to justify why, if I'm being honest, I actually forgot that I read this book entirely when I was like planning for this video until I grabbed my stack of books that has slowly accrued over the past 2 months, and I saw that this was in the stack. I had already done all of my notes and stuff for the other books I was talking about, and I had no memory at all that this was something that I read. Probably because I don't think Ali Hazelwood has any memory at all of writing this book. How could she? How could she? She went on to write 6 more things immediately after this was published in October of 2024. This was like fine. I gave it 3 stars. It is a novella that follows these 2 video game developers who work for rival companies, and they end up having to work together on this project to adapt the 3rd game of this massively successful fantasy franchise. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like a Baldur's Gate 3 situation, except where Baldur's Gate 3 is adapted much more generally from the world of D&D. The series in this book that's being adapted is literally like a series of fantasy books where the first 2 games in the series were just within the world of the fantasy books. But for the 3rd game, the main characters, who are both really emotionally attached to the original story, want to actually like adapt what was written rather than just doing another new story inside of the same world. So it's like an especially meaningful entry into the franchise. And for some reason, even though I really don't think that this is how this would work in real life, for some reason, whatever company owns this IP are like, hey, 2 rival studios who have both applied for the right to adapt this story, we don't think that either of you guys could do it alone because one of you is really good at story and the other one is really good at combat. How about we make you work together? What if you both do it? Which is just something that I don't think has ever happened. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's just not a thing in the real world. But it's a decent conceit for this book, because to see if they're all gonna be able to get along, or if this company is gonna have to go with like some larger other video game developer instead of the 2 of them, everybody gets sent out to this private ski resort, because importantly, like, it's not just the 2 main characters who have beef and are rivals. Like, everybody at both of this studio, they either all hate each other or like have been dating or engaged and then broke up, or like have some kind of just tumultuous past. Like, there are so many pairs of people who are enemies that have stoked this beef over the course of many, many years. So yeah, they have to all go there and see if they can work it out on the remix. And that's what this book is. Yeah, I thought it was perfectly fine. Again, I gave it 3 stars. It's kind of just an Ali Hazelwood book. The conflict is definitely paper thin. Pretty unbelievable, if we're being honest, when we look at how it's impacted these people's lives. Like, you gotta suspend your disbelief a little bit, okay? It's pretty ridiculous at the end of the day. Yeah, I was very whelmed reading this, but I don't know, man. I like that I can just go and pick up an Ali Hazelwood novella that's like 180 pages long at the end of a hard week and get my daily dose of this just gigantic, hulking, obsessed nerd. Like, there's comfort in that. There's comfort in knowing exactly what you're gonna get from a story like this. This is just, with love, a strictly worse version of every other book that she's ever written. If you like Ali Hazelwood, you'll probably have a fun time. If you don't like Ali Hazelwood, don't pick this up, dude. What are you doing? What are you doing considering picking up an Ali Hazelwood novel? I do think that she has some full-length books that are standouts emotionally from the rest of her catalog, but this is not that. This is just everything that she's ever written, but again, and shorter, and with video games. Like, that's it. You know what you're gonna get. You too could pick up and read this book and then immediately forget that that was a thing that you did a month and a half ago. Next up, for my Patreon book club in March, we read Beloved, and I am going to admit something here, mildly embarrassing, I think, to admit on a channel where I am trusted somewhat as a book reviewer, but I'm doing it hopefully to make you guys feel a little bit less intimidated by books like this one. This book was the very first classic that I've completed as an adult that was not in some way related to my college degree. I have read modern literary fiction that has been pretty challenging over the years, not so much in this video, but like in other places in my past on this channel, but the historical literary canon is something that I found kind of scary, because as somebody where everything that I read, I talk about here on my channel, it's kind kind of intimidating to read and review a book like this one and then to give my take, like my take actually matters at all when it's a book like this that has such a rich history and that has meant so much historically to so many generations of people. And even now, after finishing this book, I still kind of feel that way insofar as, I mean, take me as seriously as you want, I guess, when I talk about this, but I'm really just a normal guy who read this book and felt some feelings when I read it. I wasn't out here reading this book through a particularly analytical, patient, or scholarly lens. Because of that, you shouldn't really expect me to have like a meaningful new take to give you about Beloved that has never been said before. Like that's not gonna happen. But here's the thing, here's why I mention this. I would like to read more classics in general. I think it would be good for me. And I think that most people who read would aspirationally like to have read more classics. I think that's pretty common. But at least for people who are not practiced in reading classics on their own outside of school, I think it's easy to get into our heads with books like this and put them onto this pedestal where in order to read them correctly, you have to understand them perfectly. You have to annotate them. You have to engage with them in a perfect academic sense. This is me giving you permission to just pick up a book like this and read it like it's just a book. Obviously, there's a lot of value to be had in engaging with complex books like this in a complex way, in reading something slowly and deeply if you have the time and the will to do so. Like, this is not me saying that none of that is worth doing, because that's not what I believe. I actually believe the opposite. This is just me also saying that I think that most people, or at least most Americans, would benefit from the base emotional experience of just reading Beloved as a book. And I think that a lot of people end up intimidated out of doing that because we see reading classics as this necessarily academic event where at the end of it, we have to have this enlightened, perfectly formed understanding of not just the novel we have read, not just what happens, but also the importance of it, everything that it meant to history, just like you hopefully would when you're learning how to do those things inside of an English class. And I just think that that's kind of unfortunate because you can always come back and do that. You can always come back and gain a greater understanding of a book that you love a second time, but only if you're not afraid to pick it up the first time, because it's perfectly okay to just read a book like this and understand what you understand and to not understand what you might not understand and just sit with whatever cocktail of emotions that experience provides you. And if at the end of it all, you want to go and dive in and analyze a book like this, yeah, there is so much material out there that you can use. That's one of the big benefits of doing that with a book that a lot of people have loved for a very long time. But that imaginary pressure to always do that in order to feel like you've done something the right way shouldn't be an obstacle to just giving something like this an attempt. Every book that is now a classic was once just a Rorschach test that you as a reader, you got to interpret based on how it made you feel when you were reading it, you know? That's what I'm trying to say. Not just to you, but also to me as somebody who feels pretty insecure sometimes talking about things that I feel like I don't know enough about to be able to speak about intelligently. And with everything I've just had in mind, I'm gonna give you my take, I'm gonna give you my opinion. But first of all, if you don't know what this book is about, Beloved is a novel that is based directly on a real historical tragedy where an escaped slave named Margaret Garner ended up killing one of her children after it became clear to her that she had been caught and would be returned to slavery. She made the decision to kill her kid, and ideally she wanted to kill her other kids as well, and also herself, because she thought that that fate of death was a better fate than the fate of returning back to captivity. But she was stopped by the people who had caught her before she was able to carry out that plan all the way. And in Beloved, Setha is the name of the woman who does just that, except instead of returning to slavery like the real Margaret did when she was caught, Setha ends up, in a twist of fate, able to retain her freedom in the wake of that tragedy. And this book ends up being an exploration of what leads somebody to do something like that, something that is maybe on paper one of the most viscerally evil acts that we can conceive of, right? Like a parent killing their own child. The narrative of this book is challenging you not only to understand how that might have happened, but also to empathize with the person who committed that act. And in doing so, we're also following the deep, deep guilt and trauma that is following Setha around years and years after the fact. Not just the trauma of that incident, but also the trauma of all of her years as a slave up to that point. The way that we do this is through this very fluid timeline where we're constantly moving present to past and back again in a way that is honestly pretty difficult to follow at times. Like, the book will just blast you into the past mid-paragraph sometimes. But the present day inciting event in this story is that over 15 years after the death of that child, Setha is living with her daughter in a house that is haunted by the ghost of that dead kid. And when out of nowhere one day, the only other, to our knowledge, surviving escaped slave from Setha's old plantation ends up showing up at her door. His name is Paul D, and Paul D shows up, connects with Setha, and is able to temporarily exorcise this ghost from her house, which then causes that spirit, who is now displaced, to physically manifest as a living, breathing girl named Beloved, who just shows up one day on their doorstep and joins the family. And then we move on from there. Overall, I really liked this. I gave it 4 stars. horse. I will say that as a warning for tone and content, I mean, if it's not already obvious, this book is really heavy. And it's also really heavy in a way that if this was released today and then somehow also it went like turbo viral on TikTok, maybe this is insane to say, but I honestly do not think that like book threads and book Twitter would survive it. Like there would be people calling for the cancellation of Toni Morrison if this book was released today and if it went viral on the wrong corners of the internet. Because yeah, the horrors of slavery in this book were horrific. I think that all of us can agree on that, at least everybody who matters. But also in Beloved, the formerly enslaved people do some objectively pretty fucked up stuff. Like if it's not already pretty obvious just by the synopsis, there's a lot inside of this book that is meant to make you uncomfortable on purpose in a way that I thought was meaningful, but that definitely requires you not only to be a little prepared in terms of like headspace for what you're getting into, but also to sit in that discomfort and like ponder it a little bit and, you know, see these situations with an appropriate level of nuance. Just some things that sometimes don't always happen on the internet, I fear. But anyways, yeah, the characters, Setha, Paul D, also Setha's daughter, Denver, and then her mother-in-law, Baby Suggs. All of the central characters of this book are experiencing the same trauma of chattel slavery in completely different ways. All of these people are tired. They are exhausted beyond anything that most of us could possibly imagine. Like there is just this bone-deep world weariness that pervades every perspective of this novel that you see in all of these characters. But instead of that being this sort of web that unites all of these people with each other and with their greater community, for the main characters in this book, their trauma ends up being more of a chasm that divides them from each other, at least at first. And we see that chasm personified in this book by how everybody interacts with Beloved, with this manifestation of not only this one tragedy, in my opinion, but also of all of the other horrific things that happened to enslaved people during this era. To reckon with that is quite literally to gaze into the abyss for all of these characters. And Beloved is definitely not afraid to gaze back at them. The ending of this book and just the direction overall, I'm not going to spoil, obviously, but the more that you learn about these people and their lives and their histories, the thematic heart of everything for me was in how people choose to move forward and how we can find strength in each other, how we can find ourselves imperfectly in the wake of the worst things that could possibly happen to a human being. And I really liked what this book did with that theme. I wasn't sure when I finished it exactly what I would take away from it just because of where you kind of end things, but the more time that has passed, the more that this book has just been simmering in the back of my head, the more I feel like something like what I just described is about where I've ended up. This book is definitely challenging because of everything I already described with its content and also in the fluid way that this story is handling time and flashbacks. Like it's not always 100% obvious what is happening inside of a scene until you're done with that scene and you're looking at it in retrospect. Sometimes, even then, sometimes you still don't really know. There's a couple of passages inside of this book that were so abstract that I still was really lost even after I finished them. That's the main reason that for me, this isn't getting a full 5 stars. Sometimes I really liked the fluidity of the storytelling, but sometimes I think that there are just some structural decisions that are made inside of this book that felt almost like they were just difficult for the sake of being difficult, which is something that tends to bother me a little bit in books, even though I do really appreciate what I think it was trying to do based on what I went on to read online after the fact. And I don't want what I'm saying right now to intimidate anybody who is on the fence about reading this out of giving it a go, because overall you can tell what's happening. Like you can follow, even if sometimes only perfectly in retrospect, you can follow the general arc of this story. Like it's hard, but it's not super confusing. It's not super abstract. For probably like 85-90% of this book, you're going to get the gist. You're going to understand enough about this book for it to be meaningful, even if you don't get everything. And I mean, it's okay to not always get everything. Like it's okay for a book to bite at you a little bit instead of just going down the hatch super easy. And for me at least, I feel like this book was definitely worth leaving my comfort zone. Hi guys. Surprising absolutely nobody, I got tired last night while I was filming and decided that I wanted to go to bed. So we're back. It's part 2. We are now officially into April, where at different points in the month, but I'm going to talk about them together, I ended up reading both Game Changers and also Heated Rivalry, which are the 2 books that are adapted in the TV show. I feel like I liked Heated Rivalry approximately a normal amount for a queer person, which is to say that I liked it a lot. I thought the show was fantastic. It's a very loving adaptation of the original source material, as we were going to be talking about, and especially in the back half, the patience that the show takes with all of the individual character arcs. It takes a really special combination of great writing, absolutely fantastic acting, and really earnest and passionate directing to generate the emotional impact that this show had on me in the back half, also in a lot of other people, obviously. I was crying at some point in all 3 of episodes 4 through 6. So I think the show is great. I hope it paves the way for more adaptations that take the source material as seriously as this one did. And also, of course, more like prestige AAA queer media in general that is able to capture the lived experiences of so many people. I think that's really cool. And you know what? If the price that we're paying for the popularity of this show, for a show like this generating as much buzz as it did, is people being really weird on the internet about the actors and occasionally some really strange takes and opinions from the hetero enjoyers of heated rivalry, which, by the way, like, I welcome. I think that everybody should engage with all kinds of media, even if it's not like your lived experience, right? Like, this was not my lived experience and I still loved it. Even though, and this might shock you, I'm not a gay man who is winning the Stanley Cup. Like, that's not something that I've done before. Of course, it is fun when we do, but we do not have to directly see ourselves in everything for them to be good stories that we love. So I do welcome all of the straight people into the heated rivalry fan club, and I do also roll my eyes sometimes when I hear things like, one of my best friends was telling me that he saw a TikTok where somebody was like, I love heated rivalry because finally I get to engage with a love story that doesn't involve fears of childbirth, fears of pregnancy, periods. These men can just love each other. And it's like, he promised me, he swore up and down that he was not making that shit up, but that has to be satire, right? Like, that sounds so imaginary until you see how some people on the internet are talking about the show and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe you meant that. That's kind of crazy. But again, if that's the price that we have to pay for adaptations like this being seen as like worthy of doing by big studios, it's worth it to me. Like, let's do it. Fuck it. Why not? I welcome the discourse. I welcome squadrons of people talking completely around each other, fully knowing that neither side's response videos are going to reach the other person's FYP. And you know what? I'm also not one of the actors. Like, I don't have to deal with any of the weird people that I'm sure that those men are dealing with all of the time right now. Although they probably think it's worth it too, because now they're like super duper famous. So that's cool. I also think like another cool thing, side note about this show, is that they casted people that I did not know before. I think that that's pretty sick. I, for one, wish that we would do more of that. I think there's a lot of talent that we never really see in Hollywood because people are too afraid to take a chance on somebody who's not like proven or the child of somebody else in the industry. But anyways, I'm supposed to be talking about the books. I just wanted to drive home the fact that I really enjoyed the TV show. I thought it was really good, especially because reading the books gave me an even greater appreciation for how the director worked with Rachel Reed to adapt them. Because honestly, rare and maybe unpopular opinion, I liked the TV show way more than I liked either of the books, especially the first one, Game Changers, which was Scott and Kip's story. And at this point, I mean, if you don't know what heated rivalry is and you've just kind of been sitting here like nodding your head this entire time that I've been talking, let me give you like a very brief description. From what I can tell as somebody who only read the first 2 books, the series is a bunch of interconnected standalones that follow a bunch of queer men who are participating in hockey. They're like pretty dramatic hockey romances. The first book in the series, Game Changer, follows the captain of the New York hockey team who has been a closeted gay man in hockey his whole career, and obviously like that kind of sucks, but he ends up meeting this guy who works at a smoothie shop, and pretty much immediately after this guy makes him like 3 consecutive smoothies and Scott, the captain, ends up starting to perform well again in hockey after a long drought in his performance, pretty instantly they're in love and they have a serious connection. And the conflict in that book, of course, is that Scott is not publicly out of the closet inside of hockey, and Kip wants to live a normal life. He doesn't want to keep his partner a secret from his family and from his friends. Like, that will weigh on a guy, you know? They gotta work that out. It's kind of the whole thing that's going on. And I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars, not because there was really anything particularly bad about it, but just because I found the book entirely forgettable. Their connection is just so instantaneous and based almost solely on the other person being hot. Like, later on in the book, sure, I buy that they get along well and that they have reasons to want to take the risk of having a relationship, but at the beginning of the book, I don't really buy that. It kind of just like happens instantly. The whole book is this combination of either really smutty or like saccharine sweet that just, it didn't really work for me. I didn't really care about anybody. And this is where I want to go back to talking about the TV show, because I feel like Scott and Kip's story in the show cut all of the parts that I didn't care about and just had the parts that were good and the parts that were kind of giving romantic comedy, and also the parts that were legitimately serious and were a threat to these 2 people's happiness. And every single thing that was cut out of that book, genuinely useless. Like, you don't need to read it at all. Every part that is good just made it into the TV show. And also the way that Heated Rivalry, the show, is edited, it feels like so much more time is passing, even in Scott and Kip's episode, which is really just like 1 episode for most of the book, like 95% of the book. And also because I think our expectations for the medium are different, it doesn't feel as bad when they fall for each other pretty much instantly and when they start a relationship pretty much instantly. Like, that's not a bummer because, I don't know, it feels like you're watching vignettes from their life rather than one cohesive story. So there's more plausible deniability that like, oh, time is passing, they're actually developing like a real real bond, a real relationship. For all of the books out there that have completely dog water adaptations, I think that every director, every aspiring screenwriter trying to work with a book can take notes from how well Jacob Tierney was able to take a piece of media that I don't think was that good, honestly. Again, it wasn't bad, but it was just like pretty boring. It was pretty basic, and adapt it into like a real story and like fill in all of these gaps in the characters, in who these people are, with heart and with real feeling, you know? I don't know if that makes sense. I really mean this. Everything that was cut was useless, and all of the things that were kept from the book that didn't really strike any particular chord inside of me as a reader were somehow made to be timeless, earnest portrayals of falling in love with somebody and of being willing to fight for a person in your life inside of the TV show. Like that doesn't happen in adaptations normally. You go the opposite direction where you lose something fundamental about stories like this when you try to bring them to screen. And if you're curious, one of my theories for why that is the case with Heated Rivalry, because to an extent I also think that's true with the second book and how it adapts. My theory for this is that, okay, yes, absolutely, it's a large part because of the skill of Jacob Tierney as a writer, as a director, as somebody who really actually cared about this project and about understanding these people and bringing them to life. Like, that's definitely true. You need to have a team of people who really believe that your story is serious and meaningful. But also, honestly, I think it's partially because these books are a little bit sparse when it comes to actual, like, plot, actual things that are happening. That, in combination with using a miniseries format rather than a movie, gives you real space to bring these stories to life and to add something to them rather than just cutting all of the best parts, cutting all of the things that fans love. Something about a story like Game Changer being a little bit mid, having a lot of blank space, actually gives a passionate director a lot of freedom in what they choose to keep and what they choose to give away. And that kind of walks me into talking about the second book, which is also called Heated Rivalry. It's the main story of the TV show as well. And again, brief synopsis for those of you who don't know. This one follows these two star players who start in the same years and are rivals on two massive NHL teams. And the book takes place over the course of like 8 years of them being rivals and of them competing against each other, and all the while also having this super secret affair that started all the way back when they were in their rookie year. They have been hooking up because they've always felt this undeniable connection between the two of them, even though on the outside, to the public, it looks like they absolutely fucking hate each other. The whole first half of this book, I thought I would come away from it having the exact same opinion as I did reading the first book, which is that it's like fine, it's okay, but it's ultimately pretty forgettable. But the second half, just like the second half of the TV show, is just so fantastic and such a richly drawn portrait of the interior worlds of Shane and Ilya, the two main characters. It ended up really growing on me. I ended up giving it 4 stars. The thing that surprised me the most about Heated Rivalry, the book, was how faithful of an adaptation it actually was. Like, the dialogue in the show is basically pulled word for word from the book, barring a couple of scenes that were added inside of the actual show that I really liked, that I thought were a great idea. It's basically all there. And I think that as a result of that, because I loved the show so much, because those emotional beats of the story hit so hard with me, of course I was going to end up liking the book once it crested over the same hills. It's kind of a half-baked opinion that I'm going to just spit at you as if I thought about it all the way through, so just keep that in mind. But Heated Rivalry definitely has a lot of sex, but I think that all of the sex in Heated Rivalry, like all of the individual scenes, say something about the people who are participating in them, and like they feel intentionally written to show you the growth of these characters together and through this really difficult situation that they're in, right? For Shane, recognizing that he's gay, recognizing that maybe this thing that he has with Ilya is all that he's ever going to be able to have with another person. And then likewise for Ilya, even though he's bi, recognizing that he's falling for Shane, he's falling for a man, and he's also Russian, and that's also something that, like, okay, well, what do I do with that? What if I can never go back to my country again? You know, there are all of these reasons why the two of them should never work out, that they're reckoning with, both inside of their heads, inside of the paragraphs of thoughts that you're reading that they're having about the situation. But I also like genuinely do think that you see that in the way that sex is written inside of this book as a negotiation of what little power and control they have over themselves, over their lives with each other, you know? For a lot of people in Shane and Ilya's position where it's not safe for them to come out, sex is all they have. That's all that they can do, is just a stolen moment with another person that, oh no, what if I fall in love with you? And what if you're all I can think about? And what if there's absolutely nothing that we can do with that? That's a real experience for a lot of, especially historical queer people, but even people today in industries probably like the NHL, right? Where it's like not perceived as safe to come out publicly. And usually in romance novels, I'm not the kind of person who loves tons and tons of smut. Like that's just not my preference. I am a slow burn Andy. I don't like it when characters get together instantly and fall in love instantly and start banging every other page. Like that's not, it's not really what I am here for personally. But in Heated Rivalry, because there is an actual reason behind the way that their relationship is, because it's the source of real conflict, because it's representative of actual history, and because it is also the foundation for an emotional connection that ends up still being pretty slow burn, right? Like in the book, canonically, over the course of years, are these people recognizing that, oh my God, maybe I can't live without you. Maybe this is worth it, even if we might someday be caught, right? Like that's happening over the course of years on the foundation of all of this smut. I look back at that retrospectively, and even though first half of this book, I don't know, man, like I was a little bored in the way that I always am whenever I'm reading a romance novel that has a lot of smut, but the further that I got in the story, the more that I appreciated that there was something else there that was happening as well between the characters. So again, I didn't think that the first half of the book was as memorable as the second half of the book, but I mean, to an extent, I kind of also feel that way about the TV show, and you need the context of the first half of that show, of all of these stolen moments that these characters are having, because that's the only thing that is really accessible to them. You need the context of all of that in order for the second half of that story to mean something to you. Is this book worth reading if you've already seen the TV show? Honestly, I feel like the answer still is no, because I liked the second book fine, but the show is still better. The show is still all of the best parts distilled with fantastic performances, and in a way that is so respectful of these characters and of the story that it's adapting, that you honestly, I swear to God, get everything valuable that you would get from reading the book out of the TV show. You can just get that from consuming the TV show instead. Plus a couple of other scenes that weren't even in the book. Like the scene between Shane and his mom towards the end of the show isn't in the book, and that's one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. And again, what I said about how the series is taking lines of dialogue straight out of the book, like you would never know that that scene wasn't always supposed to be a part of the story, right? It feels like it belongs perfectly in the arc of everything. And again, I think that's just evidence of how well the adaptation was executed. Those are my thoughts on the first two books in the Game Changer series. Will I be reading the other ones? If I'm being honest with you, like probably not. Probably not. I kind of think that all of the things that matter will be adapted into the show eventually, which maybe is too much trust, right? To put into a production team that is now going to be much more under a microscope with the popularity of the show than they were when they were producing season 1. But I don't know, man. The books were just all right, and the show was fantastic. So I have faith that the production team will take me where I want to go. Next up, I have A Drop of Corruption, which is the second book in the Tainted Cup series. Who knows how long the series will be? I hope it goes forever, but it's the second book in a mystery series, so you shouldn't be like afraid to start it because, oh no, I'm gonna have to wait for a million more books. Like it's not really how this is. It's more of an Agatha Christie style thing. If you recall from the last video I posted on this channel, I gave the Tainted Cup 5 stars. This also got 5 stars. This was also awesome. This is so fucking good, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I love this series. The next one comes out, I think, at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, so I have something to look forward to inside of my future, which is pretty nice. In general, in these books, you're following these two people named Anna and Din, who are like imperial investigators of only the most bizarre, strange crimes. In the first book, we are solving the apparently foul play murder of a man who just randomly has a tree grow up out of him and kill him instantly. Like that's a pretty crazy way to go. And in this book, we are solving a different murder where somebody who was a treasury officer that was visiting like a faraway land inside of the empire ended up disappearing completely from a locked room at the top of the tower and showing up multiple days later inside of a river, like in pieces. Nobody knows how this guy got out. Should have been impossible. His body also, when it shows up, very suspicious for multiple reasons. And in both cases, in both of these books, as soon as these two people start investigating the mystery, everything gets completely blown wide. There's so much going on that you never would have guessed just from the premise that I've given you. Everything is not as it seems. Everything is a conspiracy. It's awesome. This series is awesome. You get like 5 little reveals throughout the book that all feel like complete game changers. You're peeling back layer by layer, looking at all of the tiny details that you're given and trying to figure out which ones are going to matter, which, spoilers, they're probably all going to matter. Like this is that kind of mystery where you look back and you're like, oh my God, the smallest thing, I should have been paying attention. And because you're really given most everything that you need as a clue, all of the conclusions, they always feel so earned in a way that I think has been missing from most of the mystery thrillers that I've been been reading in the past couple of years. These are just so good. They're everything that I want inside of the genre. And they're also fantasy, which is awesome. The fantasy world building is super interesting. I think I described it in my last video as a sort of biopunk Attack on Titan, which is definitely still true. Like, you have this empire that exists, and every single year, the far eastern side of the empire by the ocean has to like build up and bolster walls to defend against these attacks by these gigantic undersea leviathans. And then also, using the blood of these leviathans, these people are able to genetically modify themselves and give themselves special abilities. Like, one of the main characters, Din, has a perfect memory, down to the point where he can replicate the way that things are said to him in dialogue when he's repeating them back to Anna after he interviews somebody or looks into something for the case. And other people have other abilities. There are people who are modified to be really good at math. There are people who are modified to be especially perceptive with emotions. Like, there are different things that different people have. The fantasy is so interesting. It's so neat, and it's not at all what these books are about. Like, these books are very much mysteries with the fantasy world as a backdrop, and you're kind of drip-fed information about them that is tantalizing, that is super compelling, but you only learn so much in each book about this world because the characters are not trying to like save the world. They're not trying to fix all of the corruption inside of society, right? Like, they're trying to solve these individual crimes, and they just so happen to exist within the constraints of this world. With that said, the second book definitely has a little bit more political commentary and world building inside of it than the first book did, because, I mean, just the nature of the case is that the person that was killed was kind of a diplomat. He was somebody who was handling negotiations between the Empire and the state that the Empire is due to absorb very soon. But with that said, I mean, in the first book, the person who died was also politically relevant, and the ramifications of that were also really neat and interesting to read about. So I guess all I mean to say is that yes, these books are mysteries, but they also have really interesting political commentary. They also have a fascinating world, delightful and likable characters. The side cast in this book I liked just as much as the side cast in the first book, and Anna and Din are fantastic. I love their vaguely antagonistic slash familial slash ultimately loving bonds that they're stoking throughout the series. I did like Din's subplot in this book a little bit less than I liked his subplot in the first book, but Anna's subplot is much better in this one, so it kind of balances out. And honestly, it doesn't matter. It's still interesting. I still liked reading about it. I hope that I never know everything about this world. I hope that we never go through all of the potential stories. I honestly kind of want to find out less, so that way we can get as many of these books as is reasonably possible. I hope that the day I have all of the answers is the day that I'm buried 6 feet under the ground. Really fantastic. Just as compelling, I think, as the first book. Next up, after that, I wanted to read another mystery because I like The Drop of Corruption so much. So I picked up a YA thriller that's been on my list for a while, which is The Reappearance of Rachel Price. This is by the same author who wrote the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, which overall I really liked. I thought that series was awesome. I read one of her other standalones, Five Survive, and it was fine. It was perfectly okay, but kind of forgettable. Unfortunately, this book was also only okay. I ended up having pretty mixed feelings. The premise of this book is we're following a girl named Belle who is living life as an 18-year-old who's about to graduate high school. She's super close with her dad and with her cousin who lives like right next door to her. And the big recent shakeup about her life is that a bunch of people have come to film a true crime documentary about the disappearance of her mother, which happened 16 years prior when she was 2. And it's presented to us that this case is sort of like a JonBenet Ramsey vibe in terms of notoriety, and everybody has been talking about it. The town where Belle lives is known as the town where Rachel Price, her mom, disappeared. And because her dad, Charlie, is in need of some money to help pay for the full-time care of her grandfather, who is deteriorating with dementia-like stuff after a stroke, he ends up finally agreeing to sell this story and to let a news crew into their lives. And the circumstances of this disappearance are weird. It's what generated such a widespread public following for the case. All the way back when Belle was 2, Rachel took Belle to the mall, and they completely disappeared from the cameras inside of that mall. Like, nobody knows how they got out. They just vanished. They disappear to nowhere until a few hours later, Rachel's car is found with just Belle, the baby, crying inside of it by somebody who pulls over on the highway to check on what's going on. The car has been left on, so that way there's still some air circulating for Belle, but Rachel Price has disappeared without a trace. Nobody knows where she went. There's no tracks to follow. Everyone's confused by the fact that she disappeared not just once then, but also twice a few hours ago at the mall. And Belle, because she's 2, doesn't remember anything about what happened, which sucks because for the rest of her life, people are going to ask her about it over and over and over again, because presumably she's the only one who could possibly know what happened, right? But she just doesn't know. It's not a memory that she has access to. After all of this happened, Belle's dad goes to jail for a time while he's awaiting trial for his wife's murder, because that's who the police charge. They just charge her husband, even though he had an alibi for like the whole time that she was disappearing. But eventually he wins his trial, he gets out, and then 15 years later, all is well in the world. They're living their life, bringing back up to the surface all of these unresolved old feelings and memories that they have about Rachel's disappearance, when suddenly Rachel comes back. She just shows back up at Belle's house house, knocks on the door and is like, hey, it's me, I'm your mom. But she doesn't seem to be able to answer any of the questions that Belle and everybody else has for her. She doesn't know where she was, she doesn't know who took her, she has no idea why they let her go. And Belle, who also has some pretty severe abandonment issues, ends up becoming increasingly suspicious that Rachel is hiding something from her. That's what's going on here. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I really enjoy Holly Jackson's writing style. I find her thrillers to be super easy reads, especially if you're in like a reading slump or something. So the reading process for this book was overall pretty enjoyable, but I had some issues that we're gonna look at together. First of all, as a kind of neutral observation, the people filming the true crime documentary inside of this book are like the nicest documentarians of all time. In absolutely no universe are the kinds of people who make true crime documentaries this nice. Those people are usually fucking vultures. They want to eat your brains, regurgitate them, and turn them into profit. And I just found the behavior of the people who are working on this documentary to be really difficult to believe, like the whole book. I don't know, man. Just the concept of a true crime documentarian agreeing to delete a piece of footage that makes you uncomfortable. Like that feels impossible to me. That just doesn't feel like the kind of thing that would happen. I don't know. Anyways, actual problems that I have with this book. I didn't really like the main character, Belle. I think that it got to a point with her. She definitely has some pretty serious trauma surrounding the disappearance of her mother and some other things that have been going on inside of her life, right? But even if it's a little bit justified sometimes, she is the most misanthropic, mean person at all points in this story. Like, especially with how she chooses to treat Rachel before she has any reason to believe any of her intrusive thoughts. I don't know, I found her very difficult to root for in the context of this book. In part also because I don't even think her character was like super consistent where it mattered, because she's characterized to be really stubborn, but then later in the book something happens where suddenly, oh my god, she's not stubborn at all anymore, and she can just make like fluid, snap decisions and choices that just don't really make sense for somebody who has the neuroses that she has in the rest of the book before that point. And also with Belle, even though I didn't particularly love her as a protagonist, as a character, I ended up feeling, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but I ended up feeling like the primary twist of this book is a little bit mean-spirited given the context of how she's characterized. Like, I don't know, I don't think that's a really legitimate con for the novel, because you can have bad things happen to characters that don't deserve it, but I don't know, man, it just like, it felt kind of unnecessarily cruel a little bit. It's my personal feeling. Like every other Holly Jackson book, this also has a romance subplot inside of it. I am convinced, just because I guess she thinks that she like has to include that in order to write a marketable young adult thriller, because there's no other explanation for how ham-fisted the romance is inside of this. There's no satisfying resolution that justifies its existence. Like, it doesn't even go anywhere that makes you look back on that and think, oh, that was worth it, this is fun, this is cute. And I don't think it was necessary. I think that in general, when you're writing a book, if nothing about the story would change, if the two characters were just friends, you've done something wrong. Either you don't need a romantic subplot to begin with, because people who love that character relationship, man, they're gonna ship them anyways, okay? Let me just tell you that from experience. Or you've written the romance in a way that is kind of boring or bad and actively detracts from not just the book, but also the depth of the character's relationship, right? Like, platonic relationships can be just as complicated and deep as romantic relationships. And sometimes I think a romantic relationship, when it's underfed, ends up just feeling really hollow. Like, these characters aren't doing things for each other because they really care. They're doing things for each other because they have a little crush, you know? And sometimes you do things for another person if you have a little crush. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. That's kind of how I felt with this one. I just don't think at any point they needed to be into each other. But yeah, anyways, I did write down something that is spoilers that I kind of want to share. So this is your spoiler warning. This is also like directly targeted to people who have already read the book, because I'm not going to go into depth explaining it. I don't really want to do that. It would take too long to just explain the whole plot of the mystery. So for people who have read the book and are curious, or just like want to listen to something out of context and will never read the book, either way, we're about to do spoilers. So this is your spoiler warning, okay? Just skip to either the timestamp I have here or the next section inside of the video in order to protect yourself from what I'm about to share. So the culprit inside of this book, I'm not going to give you full context on everything that happened because it would take too long, but the culprit ends up being her dad, Charlie. And I just thought that that was insane for a lot of reasons. Like, that's part of why I said earlier that I feel like the twist in this book is a little bit mean-spirited, because you have this girl who has serious trauma and abandonment issues, and then you also learn retrospectively that her entire life has been shaped by somebody who has been subtly abusing her, and also who wanted to, and thought he did, kill her mom. And that's her best friend. That's like her number one. She is so tight with her dad at the start of this book that, I don't know, it felt kind of cruel. Like, it felt like a mean thing to do to a teenage character in this position, but I'm not even gonna talk about that. That's just the context, okay? So Charlie ends up being kind of the mastermind behind everything. And I really thought that was a dumb twist. Not even just because it felt mean-spirited, right? Like that's beside the point. I don't even know if that's a real thing that detracts from the quality of this book, if you will. Really why it felt ridiculous to me is that I find it very difficult to believe that you can be evil enough to be capable of murdering your own wife, or of like seriously planning and wanting to murder your own wife exactly one time and then never again. Never show signs of doing that ever again and just be generally a pretty good guy. You do find out in this book that part of why Belle is so fucked up is that Charlie has been subtly gaslighting and manipulating her almost for fun over the course of her entire life. But that's the extent of him being evil. He goes and he plans to kill his wife, and then he just settles for subtle, just for fun gaslighting of his daughter for the next 15 years. Like, yeah, I can believe that a man would be evil just for fun and gaslight people just for fun, but I don't really think that a man with a history of DV that already accelerated and got so serious to the point where he planned to kill his wife and thought he did, right? I don't really believe that a guy with that kind of history would just suddenly stop and be a great dad and nobody in his life would be the wiser. Like, that's just no shot that he and Belle end up having the type of relationship that they have at the start of this book if he sucks that much, if he's the kind of guy that he is at the very end. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that she couldn't think that she has a good relationship with her dad, but she would have had a more complicated relationship with her dad. Even if she was a battered woman who is being abused and she didn't really know it, I don't buy it, man. The realism is not there. And because of that, because I'm expected to believe that Charlie is such a mastermind, he's such a manipulative genius, that he can just go and take his violent tendencies back into stasis and be a reasonably great dad who gaslights sometimes for the next 15 years. I also don't buy his motivations for doing any of this to begin with. Like, what? What's going on here? The book is kind of just like, why'd he do it? I don't know, man bad as his primary motive, and we don't really dig into it more than that. And yeah, I don't know, the whole ending sequence was just like me shaking my head, like, what are we doing here? I also thought that it was bad shit how Jeff and Sherry, his brother and his sister-in-law, reacted to their parts in this entire mess. Like, basically turns out that her cousin is actually her sister, who was born inside of a pickup truck where her mother was being held for 15 years by her grandfather, who was supposed to have killed her, but like he didn't have the heart to actually kill her, so he just held her in a truck instead for 15 years until he had a stroke and she was able to escape. Like, that's the twist, I guess. You know, I said I wouldn't recap it, but there you go. She was pregnant when she was taken into this truck, and she has the kid in captivity, and then this kid is just given to Jeff and Sherry, and they don't ask questions because her grandpa is like, yeah, I have a friend at a women's shelter who, you know, she's like of childbearing age, so she's like 40 years younger than me, but like we're really close friends. And I'm pretty sure in the book she's like an undocumented immigrant, so they were like, I don't know, if we tell too many people, maybe she'll get deported. And Jeff and Sherry are like, okay, that sounds crazy. I guess we'll just take this person's child who we've never met, and that's fine. Probably grandpa's telling the truth about this bananas situation. So yeah, but then the way that they act in the ending, like Jeff, when everything is revealed to him with Charlie having been evil all along, the way that these characters move, man. Maybe Jeff I kind of understand because he's a little stupid and also in shock actively when he's making his insane decisions that ultimately lead to his death, because Charlie and Jeff careen off of the side of like a mine shaft and die at the end of this book. That's what happens. But then Rachel and Belle and Carter, Belle's sister / Rachel's daughter, who has been raised her whole life by Sherry and Jeff, they go to Sherry and they're like, we have to tie up loose ends. So let's tell Sherry that Jeff is running off to Canada and that she needs to follow him or else something. I can't even remember what kind of dirt they pretended to have on Sherry, but to me the whole time I was just thinking, girl, like, this is your daughter. You've raised this kid for like her entire life and you don't give a fuck, man. You're acting like you got her from Temu 2 days ago with how willing you are to abandon her suddenly. It just, for a lot of reasons, as you can tell, I thought that the ending was just absolutely ridiculous. Also, speaking of Carter, the way that girl just instantly recovers from the trauma of not only thinking that she killed Charlie, that's what she says she's traumatized by, but I don't know, also this entire situation where the parents that you've known your entire life, one of them dies and one of them abandons you to flee to Canada. The way that Rachel is like, actually, it was me who killed him at the bottom of the mine shaft because he was still alive and I had to end his life in order to, I guess, exonerate Carter from feeling like it was her fault. The way that actually works, and instantly Carter's like, oh, I'm fine. This is my life now and I've done nothing wrong. Like, it's all so ridiculous. But with all of that said, I don't know, man, I didn't hate it just because the ride to get there was reasonably fun. I had a reasonably good time. And sometimes when an ending like that is happening around me and just a bunch of complete horseshit is happening on page, it can be kind of fun, you know, once you accept that you're not going to get an ending that makes sense all the way and you just let all of the insane things that are happening wash over you like a wave. It's not a bad time. I enjoyed this overall. I just personally would not super recommend it. I don't really think that the juice here is worth the squeeze. Okay, next up, second to last book that we're gonna be talking about in this video, I read Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. This was a pretty big adult romantasy that came out last year, in part because of the success of the author's young adult series, Divine Rivals. And I only read the first book in that series, but I remember really enjoying it. And this is supposed to be a sort of prequel to those two. I would say that, I mean, you can enjoy this if you haven't read that, and vice versa, I'm sure. I'm sure that you can enjoy Divine Rivals without the context of this prequel that takes place probably 500 years in the past and really only connects in like the very last few pages in the epilogue to the Divine Rivals universe. But this book is a lot more ambitious, I think, than Divine Rivals, just in terms of the breadth of the story and of everything that's happening. So let me tell you what it's about. The main character that we're following is a girl named Matilda, and she is a goddess that exists inside of this world where there are two factions of gods. There's like an overworld called Skyward, and then an underworld called the Underling. They're mad at each other. They've been fighting for many, many years for reasons that don't matter, and also that I cannot say confidently that I understand based on reading this book. I don't think you're expected to really get it just from this book. I'm pretty sure a lot of that lore maybe is in the back half of the Divine Rivals duology, but I didn't read that book, so who fucking knows, man? It doesn't matter. All that you need to know is that they're enemies, and Matilda is the daughter of a god from Skyward and a god from Underling, which is obviously something that is like not super common. In fact, it is very rare. So she is kind of stuck between these two realms with one foot in either direction. And Matilda's domain is messages. She's like the herald of the gods. She delivers things from point A to point B. That's her whole power. And when she's a kid, one of her mother's friends, who's the goddess of dreams, delivers to her almost every day the dreams of this young mortal boy whose name is Vincent. And for reasons that she doesn't completely understand, is constantly dreaming about her. So she's reading these accounts of dreams with this boy that she's never met and a version of her that is just like her, but like she wasn't there. She wasn't actually in his dreams. And eventually the two of them end up meeting up as kids and sharing a kiss inside of a field while they're like hiding from a monster or something. But then a bunch of shit happens to Matilda, and for reasons, they end up falling out of touch. She doesn't hear from him again for like the next 15 years. She has no idea how he's doing, what happened. She also just has other things to worry about. Like, she has bigger fish to fry, honestly, than this mortal guy that she knew when she was 12. But then, in the modern day, all of these years after being completely out of touch with Vincent, the goddess of death ends up calling Matilda and being like, hey, you can save Vincent's life. Like, he's supposed to die right now, but the contents of this letter, which you can deliver to him, are capable of changing his fate. And Matilda still has a lot of pent-up emotions and now guilt towards how everything with Vincent went, so she accepts the mission, she goes to deliver the letter, and she re-meets him, and he's now the lord of his tiny little town, his domain, and they have to deal with everything that's happening there. That's most of this book. I have a lot of disconnected thoughts with this one, so just bear with me as we kind of jump from place to place, but overall, I liked this. I had some mixed feelings that we're going to talk about together, but I gave it a 3.5 at its very best, which for me was around the middle portion. This book was like 4.5 stars. It was fantastic. I really liked it, but there are parts of it that, I don't know, they didn't entirely work for me. So we're gonna unpack some of that. I feel like there's a bit of tension in the writing of this book, and forgive me if I do a bad job of explaining this because a part of it is kind of just vibes and my preferences, right? But at once, the writing is very slow and languid, especially at the beginning, in a way that would make you expect a degree of lyricism that doesn't completely exist inside of this book. Like, it's slow-paced enough that you expect it to be a sort of lush fairy tale atmosphere, and the prose ends up being, in my opinion, a little bit too sparse to get all the way there to that feeling. And the result of that is you feel the slow pace of this book when you're reading it, right? It doesn't feel like you're fully immersed in the story the way that you would like to be with something that is taking its time, especially at the beginning. I think like the first maybe 100 pages or so, that's where you feel it the most, I think. And don't mistake me, because I'm not saying that the writing is bad. I actually thought the writing was pretty good. It's like competently done. I just think that for the pace of this book and the story that it's trying to tell, I wanted it to be better. I wanted it to be more lyrical. I wanted it to be something whimsical and special. And instead of that, in my opinion, it was just pretty good. This book is dual POV, probably 60% of the chapters are Matilda, and then 40% of the chapters are Vincent. And Vincent's POV was excellent. Probably the best male main character first-person POV that I've read in a romance novel or romance-adjacent novel in quite some time. I feel like we joke a lot about how male fantasy authors can't write women. Like, that's a common thing that we say. And I'm not gonna go so far as to say that female romance authors can't write men in male perspectives, because the sad truth is a lot of what I don't like oftentimes about first-person male POV in a straight romance story is that it feels a little bit too true to life, right? Like, the female main character ends up feeling a little bit too objectified by the men who are just like looking at her and lusting after her or whatever. I don't know. Maybe there's a hint of realism in that, but I am always going to prefer a male POV like this, where you have a man who is constantly yearning very respectfully. Vincent very much does find his hot goddess childhood friend turned lover extremely bad, but he finds her extremely bad in a way that is respectful and in a way that is focused on his yearning for everything that she is. And I loved that. I think it was such a good balance that was struck with how his character was presented to us, how his internal monologue was written. I also think that, side note, Bade, who is kind of Matilda's father figure, fantastic male character, fantastic side character. And the most emotional that I felt when I was reading this book was in reading scenes between Bade and Matilda. So 2 for 2 on like really good male characters. But the romance overall, which obviously is, you know, a central focal point of a story that is ostensibly about love, right? You know, it's been like a week and a half since I finished this book, and I still don't really know how I felt about it, because on one hand, it is quite literally slow burn. They do meet as kids and then have kind of complicated feelings about each other for many, many years. But also, when they meet again, it's practically instantaneous. Their connection just comes back almost right away in a way that doesn't really make a massive amount of sense, especially for Matilda's character. Matilda's character, I think, is the weakest part of this romance. In this book, in general, there's this kind of weird disconnect between Vincent's actions, his sacrifices, and how he feels about Matilda versus Matilda's actions and her sacrifices and how she feels about Vincent. Vincent is the guy that I would burn the world down for Matilda. That would make sense to me based on how he thinks about her, how he has kind of been fixated on her in some way or another throughout his life. But Vincent, for the most part, is not really the guy who's doing that. Like, Matilda is the one who is making all of these insane sacrifices for Vincent, despite the fact that I think that it's a much harder sell that she, as a goddess and as somebody who has been through a lot more things, wasn't the one dreaming about him throughout her childhood, right? Like, it just doesn't make quite as much sense that she would be so fixated on him that she's willing to do all of the stuff that she's doing inside of this book right away, like mere moments after re-meeting him as an adult. I did like Matilda as a character, but I wish that there was a little bit more establishment of her feelings before she does things that it feels like she wouldn't do, with how hyper independent that she's kind of become at the start of her adulthood. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But I did still find the romance to be tender. Like, once you are able to buy into it, whether that requires you to suspend your disbelief or not, it is a really sweet story. And again, Vincent, not to continue glazing him, but like, such a fantastic male main character. Just so good in making the romance worthwhile, even when you're not 100% sure about it. But speaking on the fantasy components of this book, for sure, the weakest part of this was the world building. And this is the kind of thing where I know that I am particular. I mean, if it's not obvious by every video that I make, I will get hung up on random things not making sense to me, and it will bother me for the rest of the book. Like, if you give me the rules of a system, but you're not actually exploring what the implications of those rules are, and in fact, the status of everything that's happening in this world kind of goes against what you would expect the rules of the system to generate, that will bother me. That's going to piss me off. And that happens in this book for sure, just with the way that gods work. In this universe, when gods are born, they're all assigned constellations and they're all assigned domains. That's where your power comes from. And if one god kills another god, they gain that god's domains. They gain that god's powers. And just with that alone, what do you mean that you can slay other gods and take their powers? And also, let's be honest with ourselves, gods are inherently a little bit selfish. Like, they're characterized that way inside of this book. What do you mean that you can slay other gods and take their powers, but at the beginning of this novel, the god that we know who has the most powers only has 3? Wouldn't there be, in this universe, a form of power creep? Because presumably, the more domains that you have, right, the more powerful that you are and the more capable you would be to kill other gods and to take other domains. That would probably be something that you're interested in doing if you're the kind of god that already wants to kill other gods and take their power. And also with that, presumably all of the other gods would also be more interested in killing you because you have access to so many different domains, which like you would think would create some god somewhere who has like 20 powers, right? Like you would think that that would happen, but it's not the case at all in this book. And it's never really explained why, because whenever gods kill each other inside of wild reverence, it is a plot convenience. And that's just one of the problems with that system. Because also, if you can just create more gods by having kids, like I hate to go to this dark place, I really do. And I'm sure hashtag not all gods would do this, but somebody out there would want to keep spawning in kids just to murder them and take all of these new powers that are being generated. Like that's totally something that would happen unless you, in this book, you give me another rule that explains why it's not, right? Like if you leave room for me to think all of these thoughts about how weird it is that the most powers that exist after all of this time is 3 in one person and nobody's farming children, I don't know, that bothers me a lot. It's not a big part of this book. I find that a lot of romantasy, even romantasy that I generally enjoy, ends up being like this, where the fantasy components of the world are not brought to their logical conclusions. The fantasy is there because it's fun and whimsical and escapist and ooh, I love magic, right? Like it's not really there as a system that is meant to be interrogated. I would love to read a romantasy where the fantasy world makes sense and is good, and also the romance is good. That has to exist out there. The truth has to be out there, but yeah, this falls into that same pit that a lot of romantasy novels do. And that doesn't mean I didn't like it. I still did enjoy this novel overall. I thought it was fun, but I actually thought also that the world had a lot of potential to be really cool, which is why I'm always bummed when this kind of thing happens. It always especially sucks when you're mourning the potential of fantasy systems and world building that you were genuinely interested in and that existed inside of a book that you otherwise liked. I still think it was fun. It was a good time. If you're looking for a lighter romantasy read, or if you've read something else by this author and if you're wondering if this book is also worth your time, I think it definitely is. If you liked Divine Rivals or anything else she's written, I'm sure that this one will work for you. Just don't expect it to change your life. Sometimes people on the internet talk about books like this like they've changed their lives. And you know what? I'm sure for those people, they actually have. I'm sure for those people, their worlds were genuinely rocked. And yeah, I wish that was me, but it wasn't. And that's okay. Last book that we are going to be talking about today, we've made it. It is The Memory Police. And this was the April pick that we read on my Patreon. I feel like this book has really blown up over the course of the last 5 years or so. And if this is something that's on your radar, I really think it's worth noting that this was published originally in 1994. It's another book on that I Who Have Never Known Men wave of dystopian novels that were released before the year 2000 that for some reason now social media is completely feral over. This is another book like that. And even more so than I Who Have Never Known Men, I think that this is very much a novel that is in conversation with a lot of the standard issue high school English class dystopias. 1984, Fahrenheit 451. My memories from reading those books 10 years ago, they kept coming up when I was reading this one because I feel like it's a different way of looking at a very similar set of ideas. But this book is about a woman who is never named inside of this novel, who lives on an island where every once in a while something will disappear. And when I say something will disappear, I don't mean that like this woman wakes up and suddenly her chocolate chips are gone. I mean that she wakes up and suddenly all of the emotional connection that she once had to the concept of chocolate chips, her memories that are associated with chocolate chips, the importance of seeing chocolate chips as a thing that matters inside of the world, that's what disappears. And then on the morning of a disappearance, everybody on the island, they all get together and they get rid of whatever it is that disappeared. They throw their chocolate chips into a landfill. They dump out all of their perfumes into the river. They release whatever birds they had as pets up into the sky whenever birds disappear. They are actively participating in this magical erasure of all of the things that used to matter to them. But of course, it's not completely by choice. This participation is enforced by a group of people that are called the Memory Police, who are constantly hunting down anybody who tries to keep an object that should have disappeared, or also anybody who still has memories of all of the things that they've lost. Anybody who is able to blend in and hide the fact that whenever the rest of the island wakes up and no longer feels a connection to something that will one day vanish, they still do. They still keep all of those memories. And the main character of this book is not one of those people. She's normal. Things are disappearing for her just like they are for the majority of others on this island. But her mother is one such person who used to remember things, who the Memory Police ended up presumably killing. And when the main character finds out that her editor, she's a writer, her editor is a person who can remember things, she offers to help him hide inside of this secret crawl space oubliette thing that she has between the first and second floors that like isn't on the floor plan and presumably would be a good place if you wanted to prevent somebody from being taken away by the memory police, right? It's very much giving Nazi Germany in terms of what I at least was naturally thinking about. Like, it reminded me a lot of The Diary of Anne Frank and similar stories. But yeah, she agrees to hide this guy whose name is R inside of her crawl space, and that's what she does. She gets the help of her only friend, who is this old man, who is only ever referred to as an old man. Names and identities inside of this book are another thing that is never complete for any of the characters in this story. But yeah, together they're hiding this guy. And you might think that based on that description, this book is a lot more fast-paced and plot-driven than it is, when in reality, in a strange way, it's very pensive. It's very slice of life. It's kind of just the main character waking up every day and maybe something has disappeared, and so she goes to the market and gets food and brings it back, and she cooks for R, right? Like, she's just going about her existence inside of this totalitarian regime that should terrify her, but she's remarkably chill about it most of the time. Like, she's remarkably calm for the majority of this book about all of the insane stuff that's happening around her. And the reading experience is pretty interesting because of that, because you're not reading the book that you expect to be reading when you're told how this world works, right? When the premise is established. And even though what I said earlier is true about how I think this is very much in conversation with other classic dystopian novels, it gives it a distinctly different bent, that the story ends up being so detached and so personal to just the daily life of its protagonist inside of this world. If you were the kind of person where you want a real conclusion that like gives you answers about why the world is the way that it is, this will really bother you. I'm just warning you right now. In that way, it reminds me a lot of I Who Have Never Known Men. The open-endedness of that ending, I think, made that book a lot more controversial than it would have been if people had known what they were getting themselves into. This is also a very open-ended book, and it's also a book that doesn't really tell you any singular thing to take away from it. Like, I think that there are readings of this book that are obviously political and about like totalitarian regimes and the erasure of cultural heritage, right? Like, you can definitely read the book like that, but because of the way the story is told, you can also definitely read the book in a way that's a lot more personal, in a way that is looking at something like the loss of memories and what makes you into a person, looking at dementia, looking at, okay, who are we if we can't remember all of the things that we used to love? I did not like it as much as I Who Have Never Known Men. I also didn't like it as much as what I remember liking about the classic dystopian novels I read in high school, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. I thought it was fine. I liked thematically what it was making me think about and how much open space there is to consider so many different things that this book could be allegorical for. Like, I think, again, that's pretty cool. But also, there are parts of this book that just felt really arbitrary, where the world will randomly break its own rules in a way that, from what I've seen from people talking about this in my community, is partially a result of translation. Like, the translation for this book kind of creates some plot holes where sometimes things disappear and then come back because they were mistranslated the first time. But it's not just arbitrary insofar as you're dealing with some random plot holes that are created by potential errors in translation. It's also arbitrary insofar as the rules of the world work completely inconsistently depending on what is being disappeared, in a way that makes it hard to know emotionally what you're supposed to be taking away. How the main character, as somebody where the rules of disappearances do work for her, she does experience them, how each individual disappearing thing exists inside of her world, how she's able to interact with it, what she's able to remember about maybe using it, varies so tremendously for all of the different things that she loses that I don't know, I found it really distracting and inconsistent. And I think that there's definitely a reading where it's like, oh, that's the point, because memories are inconsistent and abstract and sometimes distracting. But like, I don't like that. I think that's kind of a dumb way to make that point. I don't enjoy experiencing that performance art if it's true, if I meant to just by design ascribe all of the inconsistencies in the disappearances to this, oh, memories are inconsistent. I don't know, man, that's not like worth it for me. I feel like I already kind of got that from the rest of what the book was doing. And also with what I was saying earlier about how the ending of this book is really open-ended. Again, sometimes I liked the way that thematically this leaves a lot open to interpretation, but also it ultimately felt to me like this was a book that was pretty uninterested in exploring its own concepts, which is weird for a story that is so conceptual, where so much of the big picture is, oh my gosh, here is this massive concept that dramatically impacts how we interact with the world and each other, right? The story doesn't really care about looking into that. And I just wish it had. I think it would have been cool if it had. I will say that I did enjoy the relationships between the characters, and also how the quiet rebellion of this novel is in these dramatic acts of kindness that you do for singular other people, right? It's hiding R inside of the crawl space and feeding him and taking care of him every day for presumably months, maybe years. Like, that's a radical act of kindness to do for somebody. And that is what the book is interested in exploring. It's not really interested in the big classic dystopian revolution. It's more interested in those quiet moments of care that you get when you're trying to exist inside inside of this insane system. And also how characters like the main character who are capable of doing these insane radical acts of kindness are also still complicit in the systems that are like ruining their lives, right? Like she still wants to get rid of all of the stuff that's disappearing. It's R that has to beg her sometimes to actually, no, you should keep something. She still is in some ways complicit, in some ways existing within the system while also quietly revolting against it. I don't know. I thought that part of the novel was pretty cool thematically and not something that you see very often in dystopian novels. So yeah, definitely things that were good and things that were bad about this. I think that if it sounds interesting to you, it's probably worth a read just because you'll probably take something from it that you find worthwhile. If you're the kind of person where you've listened to all of this and you're like, no, I kind of want to see what the deal with that is, you should still pick this up. I think you'll like it. But yeah, for me, it was just average. But that's everything. That's all of the books that I've read. We're finally caught up. I feel like I've been behind forever and like nursing a backlog of books that I would eventually have to review forever. But we've actually done it. I haven't read anything else other than what I've talked about in this video, at least that I finished. I would love to know what you guys have read in the past couple of months or are reading or plan to read. That's always fun. Sometimes it takes a book being mentioned like 6 times in my comments for me to suddenly get a very strong urge to pick it up immediately. So always like staying aware of all of the fresh blood that's out there. So let me know if you like this video or don't. If you don't want to, I guess that's fine too. You can do whatever you want, man. I'm not your mom. I'm happy you're here. I'm happy you made it to the end of my wrap up. I'll see you guys very soon, hopefully with something that will have been worth the wait. Okay, that's everything that I have to say. I am going to go and probably like lay down and then get up in an hour and start editing this video. Bye.